Hi, Zizaran here with another video. I saw that Krip had done a tier list of the classes in Diablo 4 and I was like, that is some smart content. Let's do that. So, Scry's at me up with a quick tier list and I think we all know what is going as S tier first. It's the Druid. No, it isn't. Okay, honestly, what I would put at the top is Necro, and I didn't actually fully look at Krip's tier list because I didn't want to have like my view tainted by anyone else. I think a lot of people would put Sork at the top. However, the reason I put Necro at the top is, well, just the current perma immortality off the beta. If you haven't seen, I did make a build guide for, well, like a very clickbait title. We call it the most broken Diablo Immortal or Diablo 4 build. It was funny because the initial thumbnail said Diablo Immortal build. And I was like, Diablo Immortal? Oh no. Yeah, Necro is literally immortal. It has like a 0.3 or a 0.5 second that you could get one shot. But you also have that other legendary that gives a barrier thing all the time. So yeah, I'm pretty sure even at level 25, even as early as level 19 or something, you can't die. And you can actually press it before it ends, making it basically permanent. There would be such a freak accident to actually die. I do think it's a little bit early to call for nerfs, except for perma immortality should probably not be the case. With no downside, and it does so much damage. Player speed, it's crazy. Like the more that's there, the better it is. Even though I loved Sork, Necro really like goes to the top. I did actually find Necro kind of boring, and that is because it always felt very strong, but there wasn't that many of the skills I was excited about. I was definitely a little sad that there wasn't any poison skills. I am starting to feel a little bit like, as an early thing, I wish there was more. I really hope that the Paragon system brings a lot, but yeah, it's, you know, a bit of a problem just as somebody who plays more advanced RPGs. Obviously this one's meant to be more simple. Necro, really extremely strong, and you really start feeling some builds come out around legendaries. Sork also has to really be S tier. It just has everything. Honestly, Sork is everything that every class should be. I do think everything should have a movement ability. That is a really bad thing about Necro, and would put Necro down to A tier if it wasn't immortal, to be honest. But Sork really feels like the most overall thought out class. It has a really good mastery. The Necro one is pretty good too, but I think Sork is just the most well done class. Isn't necessarily overpowered either. I'd rather see that other classes brought up to similar level of fun and strength as the Sork. Because obviously, like, there's so many more difficulties we don't have access to yet, so the game can be scaled around that. It was more a fact of all the things the Sork could do. It had damage reduction, it had the shields, it has a teleport, or things to break crowd control. It has crowd control, and it has a good combination of single target and AoE abilities, and you can pretty easily, just by changing your masteries, which, for example, you can have the Fireball mastery, which is you throw a big fireball every time you kill something. That's really good for clearing, and you can have other things for a single target. So Sork just felt really thought out and balanced. Aside from the immortality of Necro, I think that is the most well done class of the early access. Now, obviously, a lot of everything that we're talking about here can entirely change. Barb could end up being the strongest thing, right? Once you have all the levels. Especially with the fact that it ends up getting more legendary powers, and that could be really important at the endgame. Rogue is going all the way down to B. I don't think there really was anything sort of in the middle. It probably would, without the immortality, be Sork, then Necro, then Rogue. But Rogue was definitely a few steps below the others. It had really nice movement, and it felt incredibly zippy and just really fun to play. I thought the mastery was pretty boring. I would rather have seen more something similar to Sork. The only other mastery I really liked so far was the Necro one. For a very long time early, struggled with single target. Gotta remember, I haven't tried every build, so there could just be, wow, you just missed out on this build, sis. That's always gonna be the case with this limited testing. But as soon as you got poison imbuement, then the single target was still pretty good. Nowhere near Sork, but it was doable. It's interesting because it definitely had the most enjoyable thing for clearing, with the penetrating shot with the charge flying off to the side and forking off. And then you have the shadow imbuement. That was the single most enjoyable thing of D4. That felt like an in-game mapping build, basically. You did have to switch a lot to go between clearing and single target. And I'm not a big fan of Diablo's permanence in their respec option, where eventually you just have to make a new character. I think that's probably one of the main things that's going to get complained about in either at launch or in Season 1. Rogue felt like it was missing something. You know, it didn't have that good like ward abilities. It felt like cantrips and stuff were really good, but it didn't have anything that like really gave it a oh shit button in the same way that other classes have. So I think B is okay for that. Barbarian. Do you know, it's a tough one. It's a really tough one, because I would say once you are like 20, 21 or whatever, it's actually really good. And you do have the Thorns build. That was really good, although very boring way to play. I think I'm going to put it at a C, because what's worse than any other class is just its resource generation. And that is a real problem in Diablo, because the Druid also has bad resource generation. Both Necro and Sork have really good. The Rogue's okay. But what makes Barb so much worse is not only can you not go into combat with full rage, but it's actively degenning. Like, you're actively losing rage when you're not gaining rage after a few seconds. I'm not a big fan of how insane Diablo 4 is with its resource generation and cooldowns. This is like really weird. That being said, yeah, Bar was pretty rough early. A lot of it is just the insane focus on unavoidable damage. A lot of the attacks are so fast in Diablo, and I see a lot of people saying this. It's very unavoidable auto attacks. A lot of the telegraphed abilities are very well done, whereas this is very clearly avoidable. But you, especially early, when you don't have like thorns, you don't have damage reduction from close enemies and any sort of tank, you're just taking so much unavoidable damage, and there's not much you can do about it. So probably slowing down auto attacks would do a lot for the game, because they do have the same technology that Path of Exile does, where I remember seeing like a video of something cycloning that when the blade touches the monster, that's when the cyclone hits. So it's the same concept. It isn't like older games where, you know, there's a block hitting and anything in that block gets hit. It's obviously exactly possible to do the same thing, and I think that is a lot healthier, where you can run around and circle around monsters without getting hit as long as you know the patterns. Barb does end up getting a lot stronger later. I definitely wouldn't be surprised if at the end game this was an S tier thing, just because of the extra 2 legendary powers. For those that don't know, the legendary powers and aspect things, if they're on a 200 weapon, they have 100% power, versus on anything else they have 0% comparison, and an amulet would be 50%. So it is a lot stronger. It gets a big bonus by being on 200s, and this could really make a difference in the end game. Druid made me a little depressed. While the mana regen is a lot better than Barb, Druid more than anything else felt this needs a legendary to be playable. I saw so many people that were like, oh, it's really good once you get this legendary, and that was the case for me as well. And it honestly changed my perception. I'm actually going to make a video right after this talking about a lot of things that I feel are kind of bad that we see, that are holes in the game. And Druid was the one that showcased this, because it is so much worse. If you start comparing a lot of the classes without legendaries, like I played without a legendary that did anything on my Necro until 13 or 14, and I was like, man, this is so powerful. So just the things themselves were so powerful. I found it was a weapon with Pulverize now becomes this like huge wave, but in addition to that, it also gets up to 300% more damage. And I was like, man, it's kind of crazy when you find this, because I was playing another build and I was like, okay, this is sort of working. I'm starting to find my way. And then I find this unique, and now I'm like, well, now you're playing this build because you're stupid if you're not. Because I went from really struggling to one-hitting stuff. So I didn't really like that. I don't really like how reliant you end up becoming on a legendary, and especially you got to remember at launch the drop rate is going to be significantly less. So you will early on, the first time you find a legendary, that'll instantaneously change your build, and you're playing around that. If you compare both Necro and Druid, like you start out with the Necro summons early on when you have loads of free spots. Like Necro's just, you know, it's so good, right? Because you don't have the limitation of, yeah, this is taking up a slot. And for Necro, if you don't want to use it, it actually powers up something else. For Druid, obviously it actively takes up a slot, and you're usually only getting summons at the point where you do have a lot of other abilities, and you don't get a bonus by not having it. So, I don't know, Druid was really weird. Like, the Necro summons was just instantly very strong. I very clearly felt they always made a difference in my build. They scaled really well. And the Druid summons, even when you start finding summon items with like things like 200% more damage, they actually start becoming good, but they still don't feel anywhere near what Necro summons feel like with nothing. So I was like, man, this is like very weird. However, thankfully, a lot of the problems I've talked about are very, very fixable by adjusting some numbers. I was a little sad. I did feel the Druid had the least interesting skills out of everything I've played so far. And pretty much every class's ultimate ability, I feel like ultimate ability ends up being a really bad choice of word. Only 1 or 2 max for any class has ever felt like an ultimate, and most of them have just felt like an utility at best. They've all had crazy long cooldowns. They do 1/4 of the damage of any other skill I'm using at that point, and I'm like, this is my ultimate. So I would love to see visual increases and damage. Just crazy cooldown and crazy not enough damage. So that was a little disappointing. I do feel Barb and Druid, they were basically self-sabotaging, because while a lot of people that have a lot of experience with this are going to go like, well, you know, the Barb and Druid doesn't have the mastery, and, you know, there's a lot of things that can change for launch. I saw so many people are going to be using this as their first impression. I saw people were being like, well, this made me not want to play Diablo 4. I think Necro being like a little bit overpowered and thinking, once you play, you're like, you realize, okay, well, it's probably not going to have permanent immortality at launch, but I had really fun playing it and it was really strong, is better than sitting there hoping, man, I hope they fix this by launch for the Barb and the Druid. So definitely a little bit self-sabotage, especially with Barb and Druid not having their mastery quest. Because it's in a different zone, they should have just been automatically unlocked at level 15. Because it does end up giving people like a bad representation of what the class is and how it feels to play. And yeah, Druid was the only one where I was like, the skills are kind of boring. I remember sitting there with 2 skill points and I'm like, nothing, I want to put the skill points in. Definitely Necro or Sork main was really, really fun. I enjoyed how both played. Had a lot of more interesting abilities, especially Sork. Sork was the main one where even early on I just felt like, man, I see so many builds here. But yeah, that's it. That's it for the tier list. Just some extra content, stupid content from a level 25 demo. It is important to remember that this is not the full game, and yeah, level 25 shit. So thanks for watching. Sub if you liked the video, but more importantly, try to die less than I do.